I find funny is that that we've now got these articles written about how to avoid getting your account restricted or closed, and there's people saying like, don't use your free bets.
Yeah, but right, okay, that's a great point that maybe you can add a whole load on, right? Because I've got a relatively strong view on this, which doesn't always align with everyone else. So this morning I'm joined by Matthew Trenhaile, a former odds compiler, trader, who's actually been asked to come on to the call by several of the community that follow this channel. Matthew, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Just for those who aren't familiar with yourself and what you've done historically, if you just want to take a minute or two to sort of explain your history inside the industry and how you've come to the position you're in now.
Well, those who already know me know that a minute or two is tough for me, but I'll try and condense it as much as I can. So my history is in the early noughties. I started out in spread betting, which is sort of not necessarily known by many people. Spread betting firms you might know now would be Sporting Index or SpreadX, or if you're in the US or Australia, PointsBet, if you want to research what that means. But I did that for 6 years, specialising predominantly in golf and rugby. Did bits and pieces here and there. Interesting time because not only did we do spread betting, we started to do a little bit of fixed odds betting, and also we used to market make onto Betfair and BetDAG back then as it was. After that, I went into finance, predominantly in foreign exchange, which was interesting for me because foreign exchange doesn't have an index. It's not like the London Stock Exchange or the New York Stock Exchange or the CME, all these places where exchanges trade. It's banks. Banks come up with a price. They stream it out to their customers. The customers trade it. So, a little bit like bookmaking, but with a lower risk appetite, shall we say. So I used to be able to be in a situation where I could trade with one bank over there because they were the best price for euro dollar, one bank over there because the best price for dollar yen. So it was interesting. It was kind of like having a glorified odds checker available to you at all times for FX. Interesting stuff for me anyway. And then I went into working for a syndicate that specialized in golf. Don't think I'm giving anything too much away. The company was called Mustard Systems. They went on to supply IMG Arena's golf product. You might see if ever you see that natty widget on something like 365's website, shows you shot by shot and stuff. That's sort of VAR, IMG and them, but they predominantly trade on the exchanges. It's a big thing for them. So I did that, specializing mainly in the European Tour golf. Then I went to what's in some people's mind is sort of the evil empire, Sport Radar. Massive data company. They're the ones that sell the live data for sports to a lot of your bookmakers, also bookmaking services. And while I was there, I was doing mainly what they call managed trading services. Now, managing trading for the vast majority of bookmakers in the world means spotting those people with a pulse and closing their accounts or restricting their accounts. I would say that it was interesting in the sense that they had a very they're very into big data, right? They're very into the data analytics, the machine learning, and I get easily interested in that. Was it used to ends that necessarily didn't align with my ethos? I always tried to push for doing things slightly better, but there's only so much you can do. But then that led to eventually I left them and. I found myself now in a new venture, which is hopefully looking to do B2B in a bit more egalitarian way, maybe a bit of a fairer way, should we say? And very early days for it, but I have my fingers crossed.
Okay, brilliant. It's a bit of a backlog of experience there, so it's nice to have someone on that's had that experience. So we'll probably come on to some of them things in a moment because I think a lot of it's linked to costs of running a business in terms of how they have to behave, some of the operators. I'm aware of that. But so primarily sort of like in the early stages in particular by the sounds of it, you were responsible for odds compiling, risk management, and actually I put out a poll on Twitter and there's been a few questions, so we'll work those in as we go. But one of them here was Tommy that asked, that said, what are the actual steps that you use to price a market, turning it from form figures into probability? Thought that was a good one. It's a good place to start. I'm interested to hear the answer myself because obviously what I do is very reactional in comparison to maybe market making and sort of, I guess, putting your head above the parapet, being the people that put the numbers up early on.
Okay, so I will talk a little bit about how it started, a bit about how it's evolved, And I will try to bring up a bit of horse racing, which Tommy, talking about form figures, is arguably where he wants to know a bit. But I started out doing golf and rugby. So golf, by and large, most popular market for the UK market is who's going to win the tournament. Way back in the old days, we still had access to the official World Golf Rankings, which used to give points depending on the quality of the tournament, quality of the field to people. So you very easily got a rank of golfers based on how good they were according to the official World Golf Rankings. So you could very easily start each tournament just by looking at that list, and you'd look and you eyeball it, look at the gaps between the top points, the next points, etc. And I'll be honest, old school odds compilers just developed a feel. I know this sounds like horribly unscientific, people can't like, well, what do you mean to feel? They just would look at it and go, that's my starting point. The key thing was what price you got your favorite. It's like 12 to 1. Look at it. What did he go off last year for this tournament? Oh, I went off 14 to 1. Yeah, he's playing a bit better this year. Okay, 12 to 1. Okay, a little bit of a gap, 14 to 1. Bigger gap, 20 to 1, etc., etc. They literally would price up, pen and paper, rough metric, rough idea of, how good they are. And then they would nudge him in and out based on, oh, but he's really hot right now, came top 5 last week, or plays really well here. Every year he comes here, he seems to come in the top 20, shorten him up a bit. So basically, that was it. And then once you had your winner price, you just spin out like, okay, so if he's this price to win, he's roughly this price to finish in the top 5, 10. If they're both 50 to 1, okay, pick him on the tournament match bet, that kind of thing.
That's quite a blasé way to do things, or it sounds like. But that's because they could get away with it then, all right? Because there's less technology in shop.
Definitely could get away with it then. Generally, I suppose the ultimate weapon that came out for bookmakers was the internet and people's incredible appetite just to put up incredible free stuff. So one big thing that improved, I suppose, golf odds compiling from our perspective was there's an American statistician called Jeff Sagarin who built a whole load of rating systems. He did it for American football, basketball, all sorts. But he also did, for a publication called Golf Week, his Sagarin ratings for golfers. And it's still to this day actually remarkably clever because it rates golfers by how many golfers they finished above in a tournament. And it sort of adjusts by basis of how strong the tournament was, etc. And already that would give you a ranking. But quite often it was rankings based, 1 to 150, where do they fall in this ranking system, whatever it was, and trying to mash it together. People then built spreadsheets that kind of did the mashing in a bit more organized way. But essentially that was a lot of what it got. And if you look at horse racing back then, there were people who literally watched every single race on TV, read every single report, and they used to create what they called tissues. And these tissues was they would price up every single horse race. And these guys truly, I met some of these guys like now in their 60s or whatever, who used to send out to every book, Ladbrokes Hills, you name it. They were sending out their tissues to everyone and people would pay for it. And they would literally just look down the race and go, yeah, you in at 2 to 1, you 7 to 2, bang, bang, bang. And the incredible thing is when they do it and you add up what the margin they bet to, they bet nearly perfectly to the right margin every single time. It just became sort of Rain Man stuff, really, almost. And they just, knew every horse that was running, and they could do that. As a bookmaker, get a few of these tissues from a few different guys. You maybe had one guy you rated a bit more than another, jam them together, phone up the clerk at the course, what's the going today, try and get a better feel for what the ground is, nudge horses in and out, basis the ground. A lot of bookmaking back then was information aggregation, still is today actually, and then just taking a little nudge here and there using your own personal experience. I've got a big punt who always backs McCoy horses or whatever it may be. You try and juice it, you play the man a bit rather than the market. So, and then, with rugby, it was like, there was another guy, Welsh guy, lovely guy, used to have a deal with all the bookmakers. He used to call up and say what he thought the handicaps would be. You have a little chat with him. He'd speak to the coaches. He'd know if someone was injured. He'd know if people were really up for a game. So information that wasn't that easily available on the internet was really valuable. Again, I would sit with my boss, rugby. We would go like, what do you make what do you make Bath Gloucester? Oh, I've got it as -3. All right. Oh, I had it at -7. All right. Why was you that? It literally was, how can we get, as soon as we can get 3 opinions we probably can come up with something that's workable. And those opinions might be, modern day got Betfair. That opinion is about 1,000 people together. However many people together. It's a bloody good opinion, that. But back then we were just fighting to try and find 3 different viewpoints. And so much of pricing up football and things like rugby was simply, what price was this match last year? What price did they go off last week? What price? It was a whole circle. Like, so if A beats B by 10 points, B beats C by 3 points, what does A beat C? It literally was this circular method. Everything that we did then has since been mathematically implemented. This idea of aggregating information in the most efficient way using, whether it's machine learning or whatever, that's been done.
So once Betfair come along, that just put everything on steroids.
Well, I mean, what's funny is that there are a lot of people who, in the early days of Betfair, were using these old school techniques and throwing up their prices. Betfair had to really work to encourage people to be like, I think the story goes that in the very early days, there was one guy who basically tried to price up every horse racing market for Betfair himself. And he was doing it not sophisticatedly. He was actually going in, lay button, price, lay button, that kind of thing. And, I think for a while, that kind of people were getting eaten alive, other people eating other people alive. The arbitrage wasn't as developed. Didn't have this really strong match betting ecosystem that's been developed. So it was pretty wild. Lots of people made really good money in the early days, and a lot of people lost their shirts. Really,
I've heard some stories like that. Unfortunately, I turned up after that, so in its prime.
I mean, what I found really funny was the people who said that they were stuck with a massive premium charge, and they were an arbor. And I was like, said to them, "How have you been stuck with a massive premium charge if you're an arbor? Surely you must have been losing on thinking modern day head. Surely you must have been losing on the exchange winning at the bookmakers." And he said, no, I found something that the bookmakers were much better than the people at the time were doing it on the exchanges. So I was absolutely cleaning up on Betfair down to 2%. And of course you were incentivized just to get it down as close to 2% as you could. So I was absolutely powering it through. The bookmakers loved me because I was doing my brains there. And he says, I thought to myself, well, there's no way this can come back to bite me. He said, several years later, they're saying, yeah, you've won like £1 million on Betfair. You're gonna have to pay. And he said, like, fucking hell, that £1 million, I only made about, 50 grand out of that £1 million, like in terms of the arbing. And so he says, so I got stuck with the premium charge. Yeah, it's early days, Wild West, but slowly but surely it kind of became what I think people maybe don't realize is that Odds Checker really came into its own about the same time as Betfair was starting to really ramp up its liquidity. So if you took the average price of a horse on Odds Checker for all the horses, or even the best price for all the horses, whatever way you want to do it, you kind of had a reasonable tissue already. And back then people also had, so again, for people who maybe weren't familiar, like Ladbrokes was considered a genuine marker for the racing industry back then. And part of the reason was they had the VIP line, which was this telephone betting operation that was so massive that when they reported to the stock exchange, they actually had to report independently the profitability of this VIP section, because sometimes they could have a losing quarter just because whale gets lucky, right? And it's so they basically, but they also would be talking to trainers. They made a real big thing about expanding the network, and of course they had this thing that doesn't go on so now, but once upon a time you used to have certain punters you'd ring up before you even gone up on the site, and you'd say, look, have a crack, these are the prices, what do you want to bet? And truth is that they'd only pick the super low hanging fruit that they knew would disappear the moment the prices went up. But still, you knock out the low hanging fruit for 100 quid each way here and there. It's definitely worth your while if you're as big as Ladbrokes. So they ran a really good business for that back in the day. And so everyone used to kind of not want to go too much bigger price than Ladbrokes. Couple that with the Odds Checker grid you had access to. Betfair traded money much earlier in the morning back then. Suddenly you had this system where like, shit, we've got a really good opinion now. And it used to be quite a good opinion quite early in the morning. And then anyone who hung their arse out on the grid was best price above the exchange and sort of the general average bookmaker price. you could just hit it. You could hit it blindly. I mean, arguably now people say, obviously hit any horse that's bigger than the lay price on Betfair. But back then it really was like, yeah, this is just get the money in as soon as possible. But the early Betfair market, you will have seen probably as someone who watches markets every single day, and particularly as you've done a lot of pre-match horse racing, you'll have seen the evolution of that ecosystem.
I remember in the earlier stages when I first got into it, and I didn't really understand it at first. Like you'd have large amounts of money dumped in the market at certain prices, like lay money, and be thinking, why is this here? It makes no sense. And looking back on it in reflection, people were clearly trying to hold the Betfair price so they could probably get on elsewhere, because people were then pricing based on the exchange price. Sort of even the evening before or early in the morning. Obviously missed out on that one, but there's an afterthought because clearly that's what's happening on. So when did all that flip? Because I think that must have been around about sort of when premium charge come in first of all, sort of like.
I think so. Even in I left spread betting in 2006, 7, I think I want to say. Even at that point. So the first company that really made a serious stab at this was a company called, so people may remember Best Betting, which was sort of a rival to Odds Checker, which was owned by Bet Genius, or Genius Sports as it was. And they were one of the first people, certainly in the UK, that I'm aware of, to sell the average price as something, so bookmakers could see what the average price easily was. And I remember we were sat there, even in spread betting office this time, and we had certain accounts that we knew categorically would only play arbitrage. And they were allowed to play, not in big size, but they were so consistent that the moment there was arbitrage. And we look at these accounts and we'd look at them and they're just like, right, they're just winning on every sport. That's as simple as that. This is when we try to do fixed odds. And it's like, okay, so what can we learn from this? And it basically was just a hard lesson in that, or can we be an ARB realistically? And then we started to see, okay, when we get ARB'd on Betfair, we're really getting our asses handed to us, even more than normal. So there comes a question where the moment that muttering of doubt reaches someone up top, suddenly their brain starts worrying. It's like, well, these fuckers aren't worth, The reality is that, we were monitoring hundreds of prices, and you could never prevent the ARB. Could never get ahead of it unless you literally just just took the Betfair price or sort of this average. And so while we maybe would generate more money by taking a view over here, we were leaking here. And so we had this situation whereby someone was like, oh, really ought to just, if you're pricing something up, do you really want to be best price? And you've got the doubts in your head and you're like, fuck, all right, no, maybe not. Okay. And so suddenly everyone's coming into the average. Everyone's ducking their head further and further below the parapet. And then Betfair's getting more and more money into it, really becoming a beast. And then Bet Genius is saying, well, let's just combine all this stuff and stream it out to you. And so we just suddenly had this almost collapse of certainly main market pricing. And the horse racing collapse was really, Betfair's horse racing market became so much better than anything else that a human could do, that it was just like, well, that now becomes the way. So I mean, I want to say, mid 2000s, even at that point. I remember the point where because we were market making into Betfair IG, we started to price up spread betting horse racing purely off a feed of Betfair. We did some calculations that turned the Betfair prices into that. And horse racing was literally run. I remember that day. Horse racing was run by Betfair.
So fast forward to now. Betfair is still quite central for. There's Pinnacle and other things that come into the equation, I guess. Is everybody? Because looking at the questions that are on Twitter, I think you've seen them. Like a lot of people's attitude is just like, when Betfair goes down and you see books going to 170%. Maybe on course wherever. It's the centre of the universe sort of thing in terms of betting.
Absolutely, and I can't argue with the logic in the sense that if you've got the major horse racing syndicates streaming prices into the exchange, that they're market making into the exchange, and let's say you have 3 large horse racing syndicates, there's people like to reference wisdom of the crowds, right? But what they don't realise is that above wisdom of the crowds is what's called wisdom of experts. If we've got time, I've got a little brief explanation. So they asked people in the US to try and gauge where hidden submarines were. This experiment in maybe Second World War, afterwards maybe. Cold War even, I think. And it turned out that they were average at it. But they were better than one person guessing where these submarines would be hidden. They got 10 super Navy general hotshots, and they were fucking incredible at it when they took the average of their opinions. So syndicates, and this special number of when you get 3 opinions, it's like a magic number. Anyone who wants to price up horses, the first starting point is try and find 3 racing post, time form, pro form, race form, whatever. Already, you've got 4 sets of people whose job it is to have an opinion about what price a horse is. Jam them together, you're already in a good place. Okay, so you got Betfair, it's like that. And then so you get this point where, what's the chance that I can employ someone on 30k a year to be better than 3 of the best betting syndicates on the planet? I just can't. Even if I paid someone 200k, one guy against the combined might of these people. So I would say that my problem is that if Betfair goes down, this is just my hypothetical, if Betfair goes down, whack out the margins, everything's gone to shit. As far as I'm concerned, last point I had before Betfair went down, turn the limits down. There's no way you want to stop the guy having a tenner, no way you want to stop someone having a double or a treble, in a 5 or a tenner, and those people, God bless them, they're probably going to lose even if the price isn't moving at all, because they're not trying to beat the market. It's not their conscious effort. They maybe would like to win, but they're not sort of really grinding it. So reality is that if you were laying to lose with a Betfair price, you should be fairly comfortable, providing you're not too far behind the movements. With a Betfair price, you'd be happy to lay to lose, I don't know, 5k or whatever. Fine, Betfair goes down, lay to lose 500 quid. There's not that many punters. There's a small percentage of punters that actually bet big. People always have this conception that punters bet big. They don't bet that big. So for me, it'd be just don't manage your risk at that point by going to 170. I mean, what the fuck's that about? Just say, yeah, all right, sorry, well, technical issues, but you can still have a bet of, however much, to win. And then, at that point, yeah, I'm sorry, some traders going to have to start looking at that bet ticker and look for the people who, the 1 or 2 small people you haven't closed and be like, all right, gonna have to move a price now manually.
Yeah, no, I'm with you totally. So you just said about limits and obviously sort of touching on restriction and managing customers, and I guess you've had a lot of experience with that. So one of the questions on Twitter here, was it was actually Joseph Bookdale said, do UK bookmakers intentionally offer loss leading odds as a marketing gimmick to increase football, knowing that 5%? Knowing that the 5% who exploit them systematically will be dealt with by their player risk management business model. So, a bit of a mouthful.
So, do I think that marketing can become increasingly fearless if it knows that they will not be constantly abused? Abused is the wrong word, but constantly people will look to play only promotional offers. To be honest, I don't necessarily think marketing people think about the trading aspect that heavily, to be honest. But it certainly has enabled people to be more aggressive, boosting odds, promotional-wise, But for me, I don't think that people in who do the promotions are that conscious, really, of even some of the trading decisions that get made. They may be aware. I suppose the thing you've got to remember is that originally, I remember it's fucking so annoying. Marketing people used to come in, this is 15 years ago, and say, oh, we need something good for the Racing Post, being the gospel of everything back then. Can you go best price something? You'd be like, not really. I'm pretty happy with my prices are at the moment. Yeah, but just, we want something for the advert on the back page or wherever it was. And be like, right, okay, well, I guess I'll try and look at the thing that I least don't mind. The funny thing is, I'm in rugby, you'd be like, all right, I don't mind going best price Scotland to win the World Cup. And they'd be look at you like, fuck off. And I'm like, and you'd say to them, Are you, what you're asking me is basically, can I go best price New Zealand? Is that what you're basically asking me? So there used to be this kind of like back and forth. And the thing is you used to know that anything that you took beyond what you'd want wasn't coming out of marketing budget back then. It came out of your trading P&L at the end of the year. So it used to be a real there's aggro between the departments. Now, betting promotional stuff, like, so let's say when they do 11 to 10 both sides of the coin flip on the Super Bowl, right? That, and maximum a 10 or whatever, people love doing that. That now will go into, whenever people place that market is considered like a special marketing market, and that market goes into a different book, right? So marketing can have their costs calculated correctly. Their promotional costs now go into the marketing budget, and traders don't feel like they're getting fucked by offering a 98% market or whatever. So when you've got those two separate systems, you can basically run a customer's betting history based on that. So let's say, Bet365, very generous bookmaker to the average person who's just off the street. If they can run your account and look like, hang on, this guy's got 10 grand in his account, but he's never actually put any real turnover through any bet ever. It's like, all right, so he's only ever bet on things that we've got in the promotional side of the book. And then also, best odds guaranteed is calculated. They now can do, but once upon a time, no one used to care about actually calculating what best odds guaranteed costs the bookmaker. But now best odds guarantee can be treated as separate. And they can it's very easy now to see the profile of an account. So from my perspective, should you just cut someone just because they placed one advantageous marketing promotion? Absolutely not. If there's someone who's only betting promotions and nothing else, my argument would be like, well, maybe we need to take a look at the promotions. But the problem is that then the marketing guy is pointing over here and going, well, Skybet do this promotion every single week. Why can't I do it? So it's kind of, the race to we've become remarkably competitive. There's a lot of bookmakers competing for your business in the UK, although they may be only owned by 3 or 4 companies. But, there's sort of this constant push to give away money, and this other push that we can't give away too much.
I think they've got themselves in a bit of a mess with it now. Surely, there's obviously all the affordability and single customer view, and it all kind of gets merged into one bucket. But it's getting to the stage where the average Joe's getting hit a lot of the time now, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it that, horse racing is super tough with best odds guaranteed, because it's like you're offering up a great promotion to someone every single day, every time they have a bet. How can I not take the promotion? I can't choose to untick best odds guarantee. Well, I suppose you just bet at SP or whatever, but it's very, you've given something really great to the punter, to every punter, but the reality is that a sustainable thing for you to have given in the first place? It's very hard to row back, though, because who wants to be the one bookmaker that takes bog off the table?
Well, I think this is it's the same with free bets and lots of other issues, isn't it? It's like, who wants to go first? No one. It's kind of like they're waiting for the regulation to do it for them, so then everyone has to do it at the same time.
It's funny. It's funny. What I find funny is that that we've now got these articles written about how to avoid getting your account restricted or closed, and there's people saying like, don't use your free bets.
Yeah, but right, okay, that's a great point that maybe you can add a whole load on, right? Because I've got a relatively strong view on this, which doesn't always align with everyone else. You see these articles that say, if you place a few mug bets, if you don't take the free bets, they're not going to see you. And my line on that is it's bollocks. Like, is it? Go on, correct me. I don't.
Right. So let's never forget the final line is if you win over a certain amount, you appear on a report.
There we go.
Ultimately, at some point, you'll win enough money. The question is how do you get the account to get to that point every single time? Let's say the 10K loss report comes in and you appear on it. Well, I'm afraid you're on borrowed time. But how do I make sure that every single account open that bookmaker gets to the 10K? Now, one thing bookmakers suffer with, in a sense, is that they're getting so many people opening, placing so many bets. You kind of have to, filter out stuff, right? You have to try and make it less. So if you think I'm a trader and I'm risk manager, right? I'm watching bet tickers. What action am I going to filter out because I think it's relatively safe? All right, I might just, straight off the bat, I might just say no accumulators. So straight away you can see the advice to place mug bets. It's like, well, okay, maybe you're not on the radar so much, and they may get a bit cute with it. They may say, okay, I'll see singles and doubles.
So
Trebles.
just to pause a sec there. So you're talking about once they're with the trader. So before you get flagged to get checked.
Yeah, there'll be people monitoring the flow of bets, but they can't watch every single 2p lucky 15 or whatever. So they filter out a load of stuff. So suddenly you're not in the eye view of someone who knows how markets work in that sense. And then alternatively, you have some people, I've heard of this, which might have a bet ticker that is solely for people placing their first X bets. So only people who place less than 50 bets, say. The idea being that if you catch these people, like, okay, so this guy's first 3 bets have all been, placed at the same time as all these people that we know only bet horses when they're unders on Betfair. So we know if their first 3 bets, so suddenly you can get a pattern. The argument, Bayesian, the prior tells us that this person is very likely to long-term be a non-profitable customer. So this idea that there is this time to bed in an account, it will work with some people who've chosen to do risk profiling one way, and it might well not work for other people. So I think that arguably, if the first thing you do is go in, open up on Saturday morning, what am I going to do? I'm going to have basically an ACCA with every Prem game in it. Yes, you physically can't crop up on a radar there through your betting action. You may have an IP, you may have, something else going on that maybe triggers a red flag within all these systems. If you open up and, you've IPs linked to an account that was closed before, plus you've opened up with Skrill or whatever, like maybe it's like, in your wife's name or whatever. Okay, obviously they don't need to see many bets there. But if it's all sort of like you've done all your best to disclose, disguise who you are personally, and then, the first bet is just like a big mug ACCA. Well, no, then they're not going to close you there, right? So you're going to have to, but let's say you do enough of those. What you're hoping is that enough of those means that the eye of Sauron no longer looks your way. We're no longer looking at this account. So, and then suddenly you can do that. So,
but surely as soon as then you start making some money, that eye is just going to turn straight back at you. That's what my argument with it, if that makes sense.
Well, again, this entirely depends on whether the bookmaker thinks that it's value to not waste people's time with accounts that have not been flagged within the first X bets. So if you find a bookmaker where you do, it's hard because it's hard to get accounts right. But if you can experiment, if you could have 2 perfectly, like, let's call them bookmaker X, 2 accounts, you start it up and I do one method with one method with the other, and you constantly try the 2 methods. For me personally, I always say, like, people probably want to look for things that are more high risk generally, and there's more chance of going on a deep losing run, to be brutally honest. Because sometimes you get these accounts, historically I've seen accounts where, they're doing something really bloody smart. It's not arbing. Arbing is always going to be quite easy to spot, right? But it's something reasonably smart, and they've absolutely gone on they're hemorrhaging it. They've just gone the worst run ever, and the bookmaker's just wave this guy through. Absolutely. I remember I did this thing where my Betway rang me up and was like, oh, can we give you they were giving me free stuff, and I was like, fucking hell, I felt like such an idiot, they're like, oh, do you want to I think they started giving me free spins on just calling me up to give me more free spins on the spinners, and I'm like, I must be fucking just retard central on the, sorry, I can't use that word anymore, but it's like, and the thing I was doing was something that I knew long term was a rick, right? I knew it was going to come home to haunt them. But yeah, I got spun out for 6 months plus doing this thing every single day, and yeah, they must have just thought, the guy's an absolute wally. But there you go. So yeah, but I would say that padding an account. I've heard so many people who I actually rate have told me that it really is worth it.
Really? Because I just tend to
sort of.
Yeah, I just tend to think that you can, like you say, you can probably circumvent some of them filters once it does go to a trader for whatever reason. But then as soon as you start making money, or taking massive value out of something where they've got something wrong, that eye's straight back on you, and then somebody's going down your stuff.
And there's nothing more heartbreaking than having dropped a K, you know, 1 or 2 grand to pad an account and then getting it switched off before
It's not, yeah, I mean, you can drop a K, but also you can waste a heap of your time messing around with all these different accounts and deposits and all this, and then
I think the idea that you can do like 100, you know, mug bets, and then straight away get on to hardcore each way place arbing on horses the day, you know, on 101. I think people are like, yeah, you're pushing that there. But if you had something that you felt you had a good edge on, that generally bookmakers make good money, like let's say live football. Like live football, bookmakers generally are very happy with that market. They're making good margins consistently. Now, if you placed a load of like ACCAs on football, and then suddenly it looks like you're going to have a dabble in live, now that situation, it's hard to know because you think to yourself, well, live generally is very an emotional environment. People do lose at a better rate in live. You know, make snap decisions. But if you're then doing something where you're just like, well, I've got a spreadsheet that helps me calculate goals in running, whatever it is, that, you know, I mean, like I say, how much do you want to mess around doing that? I don't know. It's you've got to work out the value of your time. Who knows? Maybe all that time you've spent trying to finesse that process could have been better spent trying to go down betting shops, or it could have been better spent to trade on Betfair.
That's why I always think, you know, my personal view is just in that you could have used that time to hit them hard, take it quick, get your account up and try and find another one. Or like you say, in shops. In fact, someone else said to me not so long ago that, like, I think it was, well, I won't mention the firm, but one of the firms was like allowing 200 quid each way on certain horse races where you could easily exploit the value there. So you're better off walking around with your COVID mask, going to different shops, doing stuff like that.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, yeah, it's
interesting topic, that one. So what have we got? Because we're on a little bit of time here, so we've got a couple more questions here. There's a couple of cynical ones. I think I sort of know the answer to some of these, but Mark Walshed, can you ask what he thinks about actually compiling odds or being an accountant? And there's a similar one saying about, you know, are you kind of concerned about being replaced by a computer in terms of sports trading?
Okay, so the computer one we'll just take first. So there's undoubtedly, you know, bookmaking or market making properly, you know, is something that requires a bedrock of algorithms and data collection and so on. So the computer is always going to come up with, you know, the best baseline to start from. And I completely believe that a human needs to constantly be monitoring where the algorithm fucks things up. You know, once upon a time, everyone was using very basic Poisson models for football. And it would have taken a trader to properly understand, oh, we always get hit on the 0-0 or whatever, to understand that, like, oh, it doesn't price it up quite as well. You know, and so you can basically avoid hemorrhaging money on something stupid by having a human layer who understands betting and markets. And it may just be that, like, they spot one guy that they trust and he's like, he always hits us on this moment at this time. There must be something wrong with the model there. There must be something wrong with this. So am I worried that they'll be replaced? But I'm worried that, you know, all bookmakers will give up on having traders at all, which a lot of them have, and just outsource it. That's a bit of a shame. I want as many opinions in the industry as we can get. Am I worried that, you know, humans will ever have no value? Absolutely not. But at the same time, will they be seen to have value? That's tricky. In terms of, like, odds compiling versus accountants, do I think there is value in having someone compile odds? Accountants, you know, all decisions, all business cases constantly float around big companies. Is there a better way to create more efficiencies, do something better? You know, accountants do run large-scale businesses because once you've finished your big growth story as a company, everything becomes about improving the bottom line. And so all companies ultimately become run by accountants. You can just look at Twitter. You know, the Mad Jack's left Twitter now, and now they've got this boring guy in. There's every chance that the boring guy is just going to try and fucking monetize Twitter. He's the accountant taking it. So that happens everywhere, all businesses in the world. Odds compiling more. Like I said, there's lots of places the bookmakers could easily get a few relatively cheap sources of information. Just to go back to the guy who asked, you know, how to compile horses, you know, like rating a horse, any rating, whether it's the official ratings, timeform ratings, whatever, getting those ratings in a rank, well, that's the order of horse's ability. Gaps between them, well, you can write a program that calculates how big a gap means roughly what in price. You can do that. You know, But I think that is sort of, I'd quite happily take my starting point from some expert. What I think bookmakers could definitely do with more of is how we navigate from this really rough around the edges starting point to the end point. People will call it trading. But to be honest, I'd rather employ people who've been watching like betfair markets evolve all day, every day, and sort of ask them, all right, the money's coming in for the favourite here. What do you think that means? I think the trading, that is an art that is really valuable and sort of underappreciated. I actually think that the coming up with the original starting point is a different skill to the trading, even in the non-live environment. Because when you get to live, to be honest, how do you update 200 markets as a human without a machine? You're machine dependent. But no one seems to love this skill. Like I swear, like if I gave you,
I think a lot of people a lot of this is people that are upset because they get their accounts restricted everywhere. So first opportunity, they're like, oh, that bastard that restricts my accounts. Can you ask him?
Yeah, I mean, I completely get that. I mean, I think that there are an inordinate number of people out there who are closed incorrectly based on their ability to beat the market. However, I also think there are an awful lot of bookmakers that have spent too much money on acquiring customers to mean that they can do anything else. The DraftKings guy came out, didn't he, and talked shit all over everyone and said, like, no winners, right? Well, if I'm paying $400 just to get an account open, and the guy maybe, deposits $250, loses it, and never comes back again. It's like, fuck, I'm $150 down. Now, if you create that ecosystem for yourself, you are going to. It's like when we destroy a habitat. Like if you're just going to be like plundering the natural resources and screwing over everything, and you just can't. It's not sustainable. So, from my perspective, do I understand why bookmakers do it? Yes. Should they rethink the business plan? I think so. Is it hard to rethink the business plan when everyone else is going down? Is it hard to swim against the tide when everyone else is doing the same thing? In a weird way, if you ask yourself, why am I closed by so many bookmakers? It's almost like, well, did Bet365 become too successful?
Yeah.
It's like, is it so hard to keep up with the market leader?
That, and I think that was something I was thinking about right at the beginning when that first question come up as well, because Pinnacle haven't come back to the UK. The way things are taxed, obviously it encourages the soft book model in the UK. Which is, I don't want to give them an excuse, it's kind of beyond all the operators anyway, so...
Yeah, I mean, I think the taxation could be, it is a factor, but I think also, it's tricky to sort of go into, if you're a bookmaker that basically doesn't give out any bonuses, no promotions, because you're focused on providing people with the best price, then you need to go into an environment where people are value conscious. So for me, from my perspective, like what I'd like to see is like once upon a time, I used to go, do you remember Price Runner? I used to always go on Price Runner to compare like where to get the cheapest camera or cheapest whatever. So you go on Price Runner, do you know what happens is after the 95th time in a row that Amazon's the best price, you stop going anywhere else. You just go to Amazon. So I do think that there's got to be, and the same with Betfair. I know guys from the city particularly who are just like, why the fuck would I have any? I can set my Betfair to 2% now. Why the fuck would I bet anywhere else? 5 minutes before the off on an EPL Saturday, anyone going to be a better price on average? At 2%, probably not. So so they almost become like, well, why bother? And so I think, but how hard is it to make enough people value aware that you get like, it's hard, but Bet365 and these people are generating other value for you. Like the streaming, it costs a lot to stream the game. I mean, how many people do you know who are banned by Bet365? They still got 2p in the account so they can watch the bloody stream.
Yeah, I know. That's all. It's also a large part of the problem. I think the fact that a lot of customers aren't actually price sensitive when it comes to bets. They like the swishy apps, the streaming, all the other stuff like talking about there. So one last one to finish up on then, Matthew. Have you ever been tempted to go it alone anywhere else, or or do this? You've obviously got a huge amount of experience in the industry. You obviously know where there's a lot of bias in the markets and places to exploit. What is it that keeps you like, you know, working at these various firms? I know you're at a different one now.
So I suppose let's not beat about the bush. The absolute first one is I'm naturally risk averse, and I plagued with self-doubt constantly, and I simply am just too mentally fragile. Like, there's no point, like, I don't want to big it up. Like, oh, I found it too hard to get on after a while. No, I just fucking not mentally equipped for it. And the other part of being mentally equipped for it is that I'm sure you can't. There's a lot of days where the only person you hear speaking is your own voice talking to yourself. And I am someone who loves being around other people and socializing. So by working in like people say, like, I dread going to work, all the rest of it. I'll be honest. I've always enjoyed going to work. I've always enjoyed being around other people. Yeah. So the idea of going it alone, really, making it. And also, like, so the other thing is, like, people say, like, oh, what bankroll do you want to start being a pro punter? And, I'm thinking to myself, right, well, mortgage is this is this. Like, I get to the end of it and I'm like, I need about $250,000 before I'd feel comfortable. And you're like, well, mate, I'm sorry. If you feel like that, you're never going to make it's quite hard to build up $250,000 tank, right?
No, that's totally fair. And, actually looking back on it, I think, I mean, obviously everything worked out fine, but initially when I think about it, I think when I first went full time, I think I had about 6 months of expenses covered. I didn't really have a lot of expenses, and I had like $5,000 trading bankroll on Betfair. And it's insanity when you talk about it like that now. In a way, it feels like it anyway.
But it's funny. You must speak to a lot of people who want to go on this trading journey, and I think to myself things like that. So people hated working for someone else. Classic example, me, never bothered me. 2, maybe didn't have the opportunities when they were younger, didn't get a chance to get a good degree like me, maybe didn't get the opportunities given to them. So therefore, what's the downside in giving this a go? I can go back to bricklaying or whatever it is if I need to, but why not give this a spin? I didn't have that. I've always been like, I can't even get a bloody pension now anyway because I do cash in hand stuff. Me, got a nice pension, got medical insurance and all this. So my scenario is always going to be dramatically different from some of those people who feel themselves like this could be the chance to have a life that is significantly better than the life I have now. And for those people, power to you.
Totally fair question. I think in a way you kind of just described me.
Well, I mean, but the thing is like, it's not even, I mean, you're not even just trading, right? You're creating content, you're doing all these other things. Any given day, you probably crack open your email, got 1 million people saying, oh, I did paid the payment and didn't get the ebook or didn't do any sort of things. There's like, you've got to be willing to sort of, I think anyone who's trading has got to be conscious that you've also got to be working on any other revenue stream you can. Because, trading is like one of those things where you can, people talk about losing their edge, like, oh, the model doesn't work anymore. Some people lose their edge just because, like, their brain just can't do it anymore. People lose their edge just because, like, look, I've been staring at screens for 10 years and I've started to slip, right? I'm not getting in the front of the queues anymore. I'm not doing the best execution I can. So, all the top pro punters I know at some point, rental properties, other, all the index trackers, whatever it is, I swear most traders should also be looking at that. They call it FIRE, like retirement early kind of style, like keep your costs. Like
people say like that American type, way of thinking type thing. Yeah, I know what you mean.
And I think the other thing is it's like if I ever wanted to go it alone, I'm not staying living in London. I'll tell you that. If I ever wanted to go it alone, I'd be buying a house for nothing in the middle of nowhere kind of thing, and trying to trying to keep the costs down to a minimum and all the rest of it, because I'd be like, I may only be good enough to take X out the industry, that I've got to keep the costs to an absolute minimum. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm just not getting. But the funny thing is, there's that saying is like, those who can't do teach, right? I'm afraid, like, sadly, I feel that kind of mugs off people who teach, right? But for me, I much rather sharing information, talking about stuff, and sometimes I get lucky, right? Sometimes I meet someone who says, "Oh, that's a really good idea. I can put that into play for you," and I don't have any risk at all. Someone just sends me a little check at the end of the year, and it's like, "Yeah, it's been handy what you've done there," and so I kind of just work about that. But the idea of it ever being, I'll just, too much of too much of a wuss, right?
No, it's totally fair. Well, it's risk appetite, but then like the points you made is in relation to where you are in life and what you have really. I think that's probably the big kicker with that one. But unless there's anything else you want to mention, Matthew, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. I think people.
I'll just have a look to see through if there's any other questions that if they had to choose between fundamental analysis, one, market comparison, which they don't, which one would it be? I fall firmly into the category of both fundamental analysis to find out what I want to bet, market comparison to get the best execution on what I bet. So for me, I might be like, right, fundamental analysis, come up with my own prices for horses. Market comparison, can I get on best by going to a shop? Can I go get on Betfair? Should I back it late? Should I take Betfair SP? Should I do it in running? I think you can make livings out of doing one or the other almost exclusively, but I always feel like to really get the maximum out of what I'm doing, I like to come up with something that I feels like a value bet and then find out the best way to get on that value bet. It doesn't necessarily even have to be backing what you think. You may think, oh, I make this horse a massive bet, but the better play is actually to lay the other horse or whatever it may be. What are the actual steps used to price and market, form figures and probabilities? I've done a little bit of that. Can you please ask, I don't know, what does market making / odds compiling for in-play markets
look? Do you know, I had that one down here. I apologise.
Which has more weight, customer bets, liability, or data feeds, event stats? So what does compiling for in-play markets look like? It looks like a machine updating numbers using a mathematical model. And it is very reliant on data feeds and event stats and them being of good quality and being timely. You don't want to get beaten by someone who's in the ground or something like that.
Timing's a massive thing. I'd imagine you've experienced a lot of problems with courtsiders.
Once upon a time, it was, really, really tricky. Now, bookmakers just put on bigger and bigger delays. There's a big argument as to what delay then constitutes a bad customer experience. So my argument would be is that really you want to empower the trader to be able to go from a delay of 0 when they're confident. Like for example, I'm not being funny. When a ball goes out of play in football, the guy's gone to the ball boy, we're waiting for him to get the ball back. If you had a very simple way just to go click 0, bet delay, and then quickly back up, right, okay, now we're back up to 7 seconds, whatever like that. You could kind of finesse a better trading experience, but how much does Joe Bloggs care? I don't know. But yeah, customer bets liability, it's very hard in certain sports. Like if they do it on tennis, well, they could have just had a view on that one point. Doesn't mean they think that player's better. They might think that player was just in a better spot at that point. Big inflection point sports, like, sports which are step-by-step with points. It's very hard to know whether they actually like that player more or they like that spot more. Football, maybe a bit different. If you see a sea of smart money all coming in for one team after 15 minutes, it's still 0-0, but you're thinking, fuck, yeah, no, I was thinking that they're looking better, actually. So, yeah, I'll move it. You can do it a bit more. So time decay, you can afford to take into the customer bets a bit more. But the point-by-point stuff is tricky. What sports markets do you find most difficult to price up, and which ones would you encourage sharp punters to explore, take advantage of? It's a good question. To be honest, the further you get away from the intent of the participants of the sport, the harder it gets. And I'll explain that. So when two teams play in football, what they care about is winning. They don't care about how much they win by, necessarily. They just want to win the match. So pricing up the to win a match market, great. I can quantify, because my, as a bookmaker's intent, is aligned with the team's intent. Right. Total goals, even just going as far as total goals or the handicap, well, now I'm trying to assess not only who's going to win, but what way they're going to win. And now we'll take it to the first half and whether they're going to do the handicap or total. The further we get away from the core intent, the more derivative the market gets, the tougher it gets. And in terms of does the step down in bet size that bookmakers invariably will take smaller bets the further we get away, is the step down in the right ratio to how hard it is to do them? Not necessarily. I've seen some people who'll be like, okay, let's say it's basketball, I'll take 2,000 on the main market, but then I'll take 500 on the first quarter. And it's like, no, mate, there's no fucking way you're as good as 500 on the first quarter. You're probably shit at it. So, I would say when people say like, oh, but you can't get anything on these smaller markets, I'm always of the opinion, just try and get on as many bets on the smaller markets as possible. Your margin will be a lot better. Your psychology probably be a lot better because it feels less grinding. If you make, people underestimate, if you're making 10% on small bets, it actually feels quite good compared to like constantly being up or down 1%. Betfair grind is tough because of the psychological place it puts you in grinding. So encourage short principle. I would say always look at the derivative markets and those markets that are sort of harder to benchmark. I'm completely...
And there's more incentive for the bookmakers, presumably we're talking about bookmakers as well, to actually price the main markets correctly or more efficiently for them too, because of the masses of people that are going to bet on it. So
yeah. You always care about where your Pareto, 80-20, you always care about where your 80% of volume's coming in. So people may then counter me and say, oh, but you get closed much quicker if you place those bet markets. Like, yeah, maybe, but it's true also, like if you ask someone who's really good, and I have done, or market making on Betfair, what do you find easier to make money on? Match winner in tennis or first set over under? They'll say it's easier on match winner, right? It's I've got to put more, far more energy in calculating, specifically that price because the sample sizes get smaller. Player A versus player B, I've got a sample of 100,000 matches or whatever, or million matches, right? Player A versus player B, that style of match, on clay, first set, 4-3 games, one breaker serve like that. Suddenly we're shrinking the data set down and down and down and down. And the smaller the niche becomes. Like a lot of people are afraid of going into areas which have small amounts of data because we're obsessed about sort of out modeling the market, like we'll beat it with our own data. For me, I'd much rather take something with very small data, watch a lot of matches and go, do you know what? They always get this fucking wrong. And I know that because I just watched a lot of matches. So that's more my perspective. I think also, it's like how well can you get at, let's say, what's the most common race type in the UK? Class 6 handicap or something like that? I don't know, possibly. There's a lot of Class 6 handicap. I know the horse is a bag of shit, but, there's a lot of data to go on. Whereas when people tell me, like, oh, I like to go on Group 1, racing or whatever, I'm kind of like, yes, people may think best horses, best data, all the but is there a lot of data? A lot of these top horses go to stud pre. A lot of these horses only run a few times. I kind of like the smaller data sample of like Group 1 top race, and I quite like, I like the 2-year-old races, right? No, there's not much. What we've got trainer stats and the sire or whatever. That's what we've got to go on, and it's like I quite like, especially if I was trading. I feel like, some clever PhD who's got 1 billion races of that type to go on. That feels like harder graft than going on to like 2-year-old maidens. I know that they're tricky races from the point of view you've got a very strong fav and these, I don't know, I mean, this stuff better than me, but I always would fancy my chances as a human being who's not great at data analysis of beating those markets which have got low data size compared to like going up against someone who's got, a computer that's probably smarter than me, let alone them. So,
yeah,
that's just my view on it, I guess.
Yeah. And then those markets are more volatile and there's more movement and mistakes and emotion and all that kind of stuff in it too. So, yeah, no, that's a solid answer there for that one. Enjoyed that. Is there? I think that's absolutely everything now, isn't it? On the list of questions there.
Yeah, I mean, I could.
There was one or two.
The lost men of society.
The show more replies questions. Yeah.
Never been my bag, but I'll be honest. I'm getting to the age where regular prostate exams are in my future. So
Brilliant.
Who knows?
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on, Matthew. I appreciate it a lot. It's great to talk.
Pleasure.